Is it possible to measure the value of nature and the services it provides? How would we even do that? And what changes when we try? In this episode of the Healthy Seas podcast, I'm joined by Dr. Ralph Chami, a financial economist with over 32 years of experience, including 25 years at the International Monetary Fund. He has also worked as a consultant for the World Bank and the private sector, and today he's the co-founder and CEO of Blue Green Future. Ralph's work focuses on bringing the value of living ecosystems, whales, seagrass, elephants, bison, into the world of finance and investment to help shift how we fund restoration and protect biodiversity. We talk about why this work matters now and how we can design financial systems that reflect better the true worth of a living planet. Whether you're in conservation, business, or just curious about how nature and economics can work together, this is a conversation full of insight, urgency, and hope. Hi, Ralph. I'm so excited to chat with you today. So let's dive right in. You had a long and successful career at the International Monetary Fund. Was there a specific moment when you realized something needed to change, whether in your own trajectory or in how we value nature?
My story is that of the accidental tourist. So 2017, I ended up on a boat in Sea of Cortez with a bunch of whale experts and scientists who were tracking the blue whale and reporting on sightings and size and. And I was the only one who was literally whale illiterate, and I should really say ocean illiterate. I'm a financial economist by training, with degrees in sciences and statistics, finance, economics, but nothing on whales, anything of the sort. And on our first outing, I was thinking to myself, what am I doing here? I must be really crazy. I mean, I'm an IMF assistant director, mission chief. What am I doing here, really? What was this a crazy idea? And out of the blue, this magnificent creature surfaced next to us. Now, nothing prepares you to when a blue whale surfaces right next to you. We are in a 25-foot boat, and she's about 100 foot long. And not only it's the length, it's the volume. You can fit the largest African elephant you can imagine, you can fit that elephant in her mouth. It will disappear completely. Wow. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And that's just the mouth. We're not talking about the rest of the body. She surfaced next to us. I thought she opened her eye and looked at me. And it's somebody who is very intelligent looking at you. There's that light in the eyes. And basically, I felt like she was saying, I see you. Do you see me? And I remember my tears were rolling down. I couldn't stop. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea. Kept thinking, I may see you, but I don't see myself. I don't know how is it that I never seen you before? How I never knew you existed. So yes, there are moments in life. I have a few of them, but this one is really was different because everything changed after that. Now, the next thing is, of course, what happened was at night we would be on the boat for like 11 hours, and at night we would cook together, and it was scientists and their spouses or significant others. And I was by myself, and I'm sitting there, and they're having a discussion about whale carbon. And I didn't know anything about whale carbon. And I just asked, what is this? What is this all about? I knew about carbon because my first degree is in sciences. And I said, we're all carbon units. And they said, yeah, but you have as much carbon as a whale. And I said, so how much does a whale have? And they said, why don't you go read papers by Andy Pershing and others? And as they're all asleep, I'm in my room by myself. So I'm downloading on my iPad the first paper because I'm a researcher. I found that the scientists had been looking at the amount of carbon on a whale. And economists, we think differently, finance people. We're always thinking on average, right? On average, how much do you make? On average, how much do you work? On average. And scientists don't think in averages because these are different species of whales. But I just wanted to get the back of the envelope calculation, like how much are we talking about? The number that popped out, I fell off my bed because I'm quite good in quant. So I built the Excel spreadsheet very quickly and I worked on it. And then the number that popped up was, 33 tons of carbon dioxide sequestered on average by a great whale. And that's equivalent to 1,500 trees. I had never heard this myself. I literally physically fell off because I thought I made a mistake. And I went back to the formula. And I kept looking at surely somebody knows. So I was Googling, no one had ever thought about it. And the reason I got interested is because at the IMF at the time, we were very much interested in pricing carbon. Why? Because we wanted the society, Paris Accord of 2015, the world is supposed to reduce emissions and pull the carbon that is in the atmosphere. So the IMF was working on what would be the price of carbon that would change people's behavior. So that's my background, right? So I come into this. So then they tell me about the carbon of a whale. And so the next day, they all had a good night's sleep. I hardly slept. Next day, we did not go out on the water because it was northern wind and it was very choppy. So we had time to have another discussion. And they said this time they were talking about whale pump and whale conveyor belt. And I'm like, what are you guys talking about? What is a whale pump? Make a long story short, imagine in your head a triangle. The base of the triangle is the whale feeding on krill. So the largest creature eats the smallest creature. So the whale eats krill. Krill feeds on phyto. It turns out that phyto, in order to thrive, it needs phosphorus, nitrogen, and the limiting factor is really iron. Now, why am I boring you with all this? Because it turns out the whales eat a lot of krill. And because they eat a lot, excuse my expression, they poop a lot. That poop has in it iron, which is really beautiful. So the whale eats a lot, defecates a lot. It's an orange, stinky color. I was there, so I smelled it and collected it. Anyway, and what that does, it makes the phyto very, very active. So by making the phyto very active, there's more phyto. If there's more phyto, there's more krill. And therefore, there's more food. So you get this virtuous cycle. So whale eats krill, krill eats phyto, phyto needs the poop of the whale. Okay? Now, why is that interesting? Because I'm sitting with those guys and I said, so I know phyto captures carbon, 37 gigatons per year. That's equivalent to the work of 4 Amazon forests per year. Why is that interesting? Because the next question that I asked is where everything started. I said, so the whale is capturing carbon on her body, and when she passes away, when she dies, she's going to sink because they're so heavy. They sink, and anything that sinks below 1,000 meters is sequestered forever. You don't need to reach the bottom of the ocean. You just have to go below 1,000 meters. That's it. That carbon never goes back up into the atmosphere. It's only when humans come and they dredge and they pull stuff that carbon goes back up and goes back up into the atmosphere. So what happens next is, so they said, why are you so interested? And this is where you think like a crazy idea. I said, if whales are capturing carbon on their body and they're capturing carbon indirectly by fertilizing the phyto, because when you fertilize the phyto becomes far more active and it sucks in even more carbon. They said, okay. I said, has anybody calculated the full impact? No. But why are you even asking that question? I said, look, the whale is doing something that's far more valuable than what I'm doing. I provide economic services, dime a dozen. But the whale is sequestering carbon. She is part of the fight against climate change and keeping the climate, regulating the climate. That service of hers is far more valuable than anything I can imagine that I can do. You're telling me that whales are dying in the thousands from ship strikes, from sonar testing, from seismic testing, from being caught in nets, from pollution, from plastic pollution. They said yes. I said, has anybody paid a penalty for this? They said, no, there's no penalty. I said, therefore, the price of this, the value to the society is not recognized. So they said, what do you intend to do? I said, I'm a financial economist. I'm a professional economist, especially a finance guy. I can price for services. They thought I was really crazy. And why would you want to do that? I said, because my guild, who's my guild? The financial economists, the industry, the private sector, the policymakers, haven't a clue about what we're talking about. What if I were to tell them the following? In life, the services of this magnificent creature, not all of her services, because we don't really know exactly what she does, but at least a sliver of it far outweighs that price in death. And the corollary would be then, why do you kill her? Our relationship with nature is, what can nature do for me? So if I tell you, what's the value of a fish? You think I'm talking about the fish you had for dinner the other night, if you eat fish. But if you talk to Sylvia Earle, she will tell you what is the value of the fish frolicking freely in the ocean. You see? Does she have value? And the answer is yes.
Very few people will consider that.
Exactly, because they don't know. The science is here. This is not something we're making up. Turns out that science has arrived. It's just that the society has not yet come around to understand. So why this becomes important? Why now? Because when we started to realize we're facing climate change, we need to mitigate the impact of climate change. Suppose you cut all emissions to zero. We will not be net zero. We wrote an article on this because the way I was trying to explain it to people, I think of a tap. And that tap is dripping carbon dioxide, that's your emissions, into a tub, and that's the sky. And that tub is full of carbon dioxide. So if you tell me we need to deal with the carbon dioxide problem, yes, we need to shut off the valve, meaning reduce emissions, replacing coal with solar and battery versus whatever. Okay, fine. But there's already that carbon sitting up in the atmosphere, heating up the earth. That is what's responsible for the fires, not the emissions. And it'll continue unless you can suck that carbon out of the atmosphere back where it used to be. And so I call it draining the tub. You need to drain the tub. To drain that tub, there's only one technology that is 4 billion years old, and it's called Earth. It's called nature.
Yeah, nature-based solutions.
When we say restore the forests, restore the peatland, restore the seagrass, salt marsh, mangroves, restore the animals, we're not talking about emissions necessarily. We're talking about pulling that carbon out of the atmosphere and pulling it back where it used to be before we ourselves destroyed nature and pulled it up into the atmosphere.
So after this experience that you had in 2017 and this epiphany of sorts that you wanted to quantify the value of a whale and of nature, what were your steps after that? And what other natural entities can this be applied to?
I went back to my day job, and they used to make fun of me. They would say, let's talk to the whale whisperer. And I took it as a badge of honor, because if you're really the whale whispers to you, I mean, you've really arrived. So what I realized quickly is that I could not do this work inside the IMF because the IMF was not there. So a guy called me from Paris, and he's very famous now. His name is Fabio Berzaghi. Fabio had discovered that he and his colleagues in the forests of the Congo Basin, that the forest elephants also sequester carbon in the trees. So he called me in my office. I was at the IMF with his Italian accent. And he said, you're helping to save the whales. What about my elephants? I said, what about your elephants? What about them? So what happened is, again, he started teaching me about the elephants. And I realized, oh my God, okay, so it's not only trees that sequester carbon, it's animals interacting with their environment. So we worked with Fabio to value the services of a living elephant. And we published that work in the top journals. And then the UN came along, and I was still at the IMF, and they said, hey, you seem to know how to value a living nature. I said, I'm not valuing a living nature. I'm valuing the services, some of the services of a living. Let's all agree that life is priceless. Let's just agree. No one would disagree with that. Well, all I'm saying is we live in a market system. The market system says, always will say to you, you have value? What is your price? If you say, I don't have a price, you have no value. Unfortunately, right? So the UN came along and said, can you value seagrass? And again, I asked, I know nothing about seagrass. You see, I'm an accidental tourist. I'm like, I'm nothing about seagrass. They said, oh, if you want to know about seagrass, you got to go talk to this famous guy named Carlos Duarte. He's the #1 marine ecologist in the world. And so I had to go to Carlos and say, can you teach me about seagrass? And he said, oh, go read my papers. We read his papers and we discovered that seagrass, again, seagrass living for itself, meaning not aware of human existence, just existing, by just living, right? By just being there, is sequestering carbon, is enhancing fish stock because fish like to hide in the seagrass, is providing coastal protection. It's purifying the water for the coral reefs next to it. And what we found is that just carbon sequestration alone, seagrass is worth over $1 trillion.
Wow.
Worldwide. That's when, you start to see in front of you nature alive and well, living for itself, not living for you and me. Right? So when I say the value of the services of an elephant is not an elephant in a zoo or tied to a tree, an elephant frolicking in the forest, living her life, not even aware of our existence. By doing that, she is enhancing carbon in the forest by at least 14%. That's the work of Fabio Berzaghi and his colleagues. It's not my work. All I did with my colleagues, we valued that service as $1.75 million per elephant.
Wow.
Why is that important? Because a dead elephant fetches $30,000 for her tusks. You take her away from her family, from her culture, from her history, for a measly $30,000 that the villagers never get. It's only the ivory trader gets some of that, right? Whereas a living elephant, just frolicking with her herd, right, is far more. So I started to see this pattern. I thought, my goodness. Then your question is, what do you do with all that? I'm going to give you an example. We are starting work with Native Americans in the United States. Native Americans are rewilding. They're bringing back the bison. Turns out, and they're bringing back the bison because they had bison before we killed off all 58 million of them or 60 million of them. But they're trying to bring them back because that's part of their culture. It was part of their diet, right? So for religious culture and health reasons, they're bringing back the bison. Turns out when you bring back the bison, the original grass comes back. I saw it with my own eyes because I visited Wind River Reservation with the Shoshones and the Arapaho, and then I went to the Blackfoot Reservation, and I saw for myself when you bring back the bison, what happens to the land. The seed that was dormant for 150 years wakes up. It recognizes the original tenet. And there's a purely scientific reason as to why, but I'm just telling you what I saw. So what does that mean? The tall grass comes back, and the soil becomes very active, which means it sequesters more carbon, which means when you bring back the bison, you get carbon credits. So the proposal to the Native Americans, hey, why don't we sell the carbon credits and use the money from the credits, or biodiversity credits if you want, to finance your purchase of the herds and of your own land back. So you create a virtuous cycle.
What are markets still not understanding, though?
Markets do not understand the value of the living nature. Markets understand the value of dead nature, meaning they can value oil, they can value gas, they can value timber, they value dead fish, they can value some, provisioning side of nature, which is food, wheat, corn, anything they can extract has value. But when you go to markets and say, that seagrass, leave it alone, it's very valuable. They'll be like, what? So I started doing that work, which is seagrass alone is worth globally over $1 trillion just in carbon. But seagrass also, you can calculate the value of seagrass in terms of enhancing fish stock. And then you can calculate the value of seagrass from coastal protection. When you add all those up, it's real gold. Now, why is that important? Because when you go to a resort, you find the tourist telling the resort owner, can you cut that seagrass? We don't want our feet to touch the seagrass when we wade into the water. I've been there myself. And what you want that guy to say, I prefer the seagrass to you because the seagrass is worth a lot more to me than you. In the Bahamas, let me give you an example of how powerful this is. Bahamas is sitting on 30% of the total mass of seagrass in the world. That's not me, that's science, published in Nature Journal. Okay, that's the work of Carlos Duarte with the group Blue Carbon International. Okay, the scientists, they did it in an ingenious way, figured out that Bahamas is sitting on 150,000 square kilometers of seagrass. 150,000. All of Spain is sitting on 1,600 square kilometers of seagrass. This tiny little island has 150,000 square kilometers of seagrass. That seagrass, in terms of carbon alone, is worth over $100 billion. So what the Bahamas can do, they can commit to the protection and restoration of their seagrass meadows and sell the carbon of the seagrass. So you never sell the seagrass. First principle of this work, you never sell the underlying, ever. So it's like owning an apartment and you're leasing it. So the Bahamas retains ownership of its seagrass. By the way, this is the work, this is happening as we speak.
But how do you encourage companies to participate, especially if there's no incentive for them to do so other than doing the right thing?
Exactly. So what's happened is if you're in the airline business, as of January 2027, you don't have a choice. The regulation for them is 2027, January 2027, they have to offset their carbon footprint. No ifs, no buts. That's one. Two, all of the AI power plants, the AI data plants are incredible polluters. They dwarf the airlines and they are polluting, so they need to offset their carbon footprint. Three, the world, those that signed up to the Paris Agreement, there's something called NDC, Nationally Determined Commitments. Perhaps you're familiar with that. So it's a 5-year plan. Every country that signed has to submit a plan that says, in the next 5 years, this is how I intend to go to carbon zero. What 6.2 allows you to do is, for countries that can never be carbon zero, think of all of the oil-producing countries and the industrial countries, they can purchase the carbon credits from the countries that hardly have any carbon footprint, like the Bahamas, for example, who are in effect carbon negative countries. So when I came into this space, I came into it not from the conservation side, I came to it from the market side. I looked at what was being done and I thought it was very, trying to choose the right word, very unmarket-like. So when you invest, how do you invest in a project? Just ask yourself. A friend comes to you and says, hey, would you invest with me? You don't tell him, oh, show me the product to invest in you. The guy needs money in order to produce the product. So that concept was foreign to them. They had grown up in an analog world where when the carbon accrues, then you sell it. But that's not investment, and you can never scale up that way. And worse yet, who is being asked to wait 3 years till their carbon accrues? All the poor communities where nature is sitting. So when I arrived at this, I said, well, I'm going to flip it on its head. What I'm going to do is provide all the necessary transparency and accountability and make things digital, not analog, such that I can sell the projection of what the carbon will be. The end result is the communities get the money early, and the person that has to wait is the investor. When you are an investor, what does it mean to invest? You're investing in a promise. We have a project underway on whale protection. The idea is, you have a car, don't you? Your car, is it insured or not, if I may ask?
Yes.
Yeah, you have a home. Mm-hmm. If you have a home, is your home insured?
Yes.
Yes. Why is it insured? Because you're trying to protect your asset.
Right.
Sometimes you may want to protect the asset, but the insurance company says we're not willing to insure it. Now, why am I telling you this when we talk about the whales? Because I want to protect the whales. How do I protect the whales? The markets has to see that if I hurt the whale, there's some penalty involved. How do you assess the penalty? If somebody were to, God forbid, steal your car, there's a value that is lost. The whale right now, if somebody kills a whale, there is no penalty. Right now, as you and I are talking, there's a ship coming into Los Angeles port with a beautiful blue whale skewered on her bow. What is the penalty? Zero. So the first thing we did is we were working with the Maori people in New Zealand, and there what the Maoris did, they conferred personhood on the whale.
Oh, wow, amazing.
That was March 27 of 2024. The king, I was there. I was one of the signatories. In Cook Islands, the Maori king and other Polynesian leaders, they met. It was reported in the newspapers, and they conferred legal personhood on a whale. That doesn't mean that the whale is a person. It just basically says the whale is endowed with certain rights. And if you violate those rights, there's going to be a repercussion. So if you're in Maori territory and you were to hurt the whale, they're going to come after you. You see? Now, why is that important? Not because you want to penalize anybody, because then if you're a ship captain and you're coming into their waters and you know there's a whale, you're going to be petrified. You're going to try not to hurt that whale. More importantly, the insurance company that insures that ship does not want to pay $2 million indemnity. So the insurance company is going to demand that the ship builder puts an anti-collision device in the ship.
So you've shown how whales can now have enforceable rights through insurance and even legal personhood. Can you give me another example of how this plays out in practice? Say with something like seagrass or another ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. Carbon of the seagrass is being sold. And what the Bahamas will commit to do is to protect and restore its seagrass. Who buys the carbon? What you do is the government of the Bahamas commits to looking after the seagrass and allowing the seagrass to come back. That generates carbon credits. Those carbon credits can be sold to airline industries, can be sold to pension funds, can be sold to all of these companies that have committed to go carbon zero, carbon negative, or carbon neutral. So the demand side of the equation are all the companies or even countries that have decided to go carbon zero, and they need to buy carbon credits. They would purchase those carbon credits. The Bahamas commits to use that money. One is to protect and restore their seagrass, and two, that the people, the stewards of nature, are looked after, the local communities and indigenous people. In the case of Bahamas, every dollar that comes in from the sale of the carbon, 93 cents goes back to the communities.
Okay, so they are directly benefiting.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that is a project you can see. Now, what we do, what BGF does, we are the ones who produce the forward. Because as I was saying before, rather than sell the apples, you sell the promise of the apples. And in order to do that, you have to be able to forecast how much carbon will the seagrass sequester. We have something called science-based finance. You need to know the physiology of the seagrass. That's why we work with Carlos Duarte. So when we work on seagrass, you work with the scientist who's the expert in this area. You need to understand how seagrass grows. And two, you need to know how much carbon does the seagrass sequester from growing. And that comes from the science. Once you know that, then we can build, excuse my expression, dynamic stochastic models that what they do, they project how the seagrass will grow on average and how much are they going to sequester in carbon with the confidence bounds, plus and minus, standard deviations, basically. That allows us to produce the carbon schedule. So what we have developed over a span of 7-8 years is the technology that allows us to model how the specific asset behaves and how it sequesters carbon over time. That took us years to develop. When you work in the forests, old growth, they're completely different than seagrass or mangroves. And when you talk about bison, because bison now, our work with the Native Americans, the bison can increase carbon sequestration, but bison are not elephants. So because we worked on elephants in Gabon, we published that work. So you need to know. So the first lesson you have to do, and what BGF, Blue Green Future, does, is what is the physiology of nature that we are working with.
And is there a particular kind of nature that you focus on?
We work on all of them. We are the ones who started the work on the fauna. So we have work now on whales, elephants, bison, sea otter.
Huh.
And now we're starting work. Oh, yeah, sea otters are really special. And leopards. Okay. And what we do, again, it's always the same approach. We need the scientist to tell us. In the case of animals, you need to have a population growth model. So you need to know birth rate, death rate, survival rate, all these things. And I have modelers that are physicists, mathematicians, working side by side with the scientists. So the work is interdisciplinary. It's beautiful. Next thing is that you give this to the project. We are not project leaders. So in the case of the bison, it will be the tribes themselves. They own it. We take no equity stake, by the way, in anything on purpose. Because if you take equity stake, it will affect your advice.
Good point.
Yeah. So when we work with indigenous people, we say, this is your project, 100% yours. We're coming in, we help you, we train your people. In 3 to 4 years, we're out, you run it yourself.
So you're quantifying the carbon of their project, and then they're able to sell that.
Exactly. They sell it the way they want it. When you're working with Native Americans, they have their own way of how they want it, how much, who gets what. We are not involved in that. That's their own business. My job is to make the carbon market ready. Now, to deal with the issues that I started to tell you about, which is issues of transparency, accountability, double counting, all of this, everything is digitized.
How so? In blockchain?
Blockchain, absolutely. Because and you put it on a platform that makes it very visible to the potential investor. We partner with companies that do that. So what I really did, because I work on project design, I don't own these projects. So my job was to create Chinese walls so that the Chinese is very important. Basically, the methodology person is not the verifier, and the verifier is not the registry.
Makes sense.
Because otherwise, your advice is suspect in my book. And if you're the data platform, you cannot trade, because then your trading will affect your data quality.
So would you say that this is the only way to unlock funding that we need for restoration?
Certainly is a better way than what we had before.
So I'm coming from the perspective of the US, where I feel where there's a lot of environmental regulation being taken away. And
correct.
There doesn't seem to be as much incentive anymore for companies to, for example, buy these credits. So how do you get markets interested?
A couple of answers to that. Do you know in Europe, there's something called nature restoration law? Was passed last year and was ratified by all the countries in Europe. So if you're a part of the EU, you have no choice. And it's called nature restoration law, meaning it's not about carbon, it's about what's your net impact on nature. In the UK, you have something called nature net gain law. So now imagine I'm an importer. I'm a company in Sevilla, Spain, and I'm importing from the United States. You know what happens to me now? The regulator comes to me and says, what did you buy from the supplier in the US? I bought widgets. When they produce the widgets, did they harm nature? I have to prove to the regulator in Europe that the company producing widgets in the US did not harm nature. And if I cannot prove that, I am going to have to pay a huge amount of tax. So whether the US has regulation or not, it's going to impact the exporters in the United States into Europe. No ifs, no buts. I'm in the market, so I know exactly what's happening. It's already a nightmare for many of the sustainability officers,
right?
Because they don't know what to do. Now, having said that, let me be more pragmatic. The industry, whether there's regulation or not, wants to make money. What my approach says, you will make money, but not from destroying nature, from protecting and restoring nature. For example, until recently, there was an offer on the table in the Bahamas saying if you invest in the restoration of seagrass, you'll get 25% rate of return per year over 8 years.
So
Imagine.
that makes nature investable.
Exactly. And of course, you're going to come and say, what's my guarantee? Well, the government stands behind it. There's an insurance. There's assurance. There's all the things that I was telling you about. All nascent markets suffer from gold rush behavior, double counting, triple counting, even mature markets. I mean, every time you read the Wall Street, there's some fiasco somewhere. Look what happened to us in 2008.
Right.
So this is a nascent market. But what you're seeing right now is a carbon market reboot that is not analog, that is digital. Certainly what has changed is the technology side. We have technology now that I could only dream of 5 years ago. And the technology that my partners, what they can do now is mind-boggling, which is something we dreamt of when I started this work, back in 2017.
What challenges are you facing, though, getting this work out there?
It's knowledge. Coming up is ignorance, basically. People, when I was in London not too long ago, and I was talking to investors, and the whole audience was investors. And one of them asked me, how does it feel? I said, you guys remind me of somebody walking into a tailor shop and says, I'd like a new suit. And the tailor says, what color? I don't know. Okay, would you like a double-breasted, single breast? I don't know. Okay, 2 buttons, 3 buttons? I don't know, man. I just want to look good. So I said, you guys on the demand side don't know what you're supposed to know. And this is not surprising for us in the markets because it's a new asset.
Are you helping to educate the public?
Yes. I find myself spending a lot of time not only going to communities like the Maori or the Native Americans and saying, be careful, or to Bahamas or all these small islands, saying, you're sitting on gold. Do not destroy it. Do not sell it.
Yeah, because it's worth this much.
It's worth this much if you leave it alone. If you look at the island economies that I deal with, and these are my years at the IMF, their revenue model was tourism, and they discovered during COVID there's a fickle friend. And the other one, they are an offshore center. And that is going very quickly because the tax laws are catching up. So now you're highly indebted, and your 2 main sources of revenue have matured. How do you pay back your debt? With what? If you follow the current model that everybody practices, do you have gas and oil? You see, extract, destroy, right? Whereas when I come into these places, I say, no such thing. Do you have seagrass? Do you have mangroves? Do you have forests? Do you have kelp? Do you have seaweed? They say yes. I said, well, now these are actually your new assets.
How close do you think we are to getting people to recognize these values?
Close.
Very close.
This close. Because I'm inundated with requests saying, can you help us? Can you help take us to the market?
But what about getting the market on board? Do you find there is?
And the Europeans are already there. I mean, Norway came out, about a month ago, and they said, we're going to achieve net zero through the ITMO market. I don't know if you've heard of it. So that's due to the fact of the 6.2 Article 6 being passed in Baku at COP29. It allowed the trading of carbon across sovereigns.
Oh, okay.
So what Norway is really saying, we cannot achieve net zero by ourselves. We're going to have to buy from somewhere. So now I can go, in principle, I can go to Bahamas and say, hey, you can sell your carbon of your seagrass to Norway. How beautiful is that? What does Norway get? They achieve their target, NDC. What does Bahamas get? They get much needed financing. What does nature get? It gets restored. What do the people get? They get to live on their land. Because when we stabilize nature, we create resilience in the people. We were all brainwashed to believe that the only way to make money is at the expense of nature. What science is telling us, because this is informed by the science, is no, the living nature, and I'm talking about not only trees, I'm talking about animals and trees and microbes and all of that. The living nature is incredibly valuable, not only intrinsically, but also financially. When the markets start to understand that the living nature is a new asset, that's when you have the revolution. That's when it takes off. And we're there. And to prove to you we're there, take a look at the latest report by BlackRock.
Oh, tell me about that.
Came out about 3-4 months ago, and they said nature is a new asset class.
Amazing. Okay.
And they were not talking about fruits and vegetables and corn and wheat, because we had futures market in those. We know how to price those. They were talking about the regulating side of nature. That is the new asset class.
And if BlackRock is starting to recognize that, that's huge, because they're one of the biggest players in the market.
Exactly. And they're already there. There are many other outfits already there. They're already buying the forward, but they don't want people to know. Because what they want to do is they want to buy low and sell high.
Of course.
And my job is when I go to communities and say, sell the carbon, never sell the underlying. Do not sell your trees. Do not sell your forests. Do not sell your peatland. Do not sell your seagrass, mangrove, salt marsh. Do not sell those. You can lease them, but do not sell them. Retain ownership of that. And I get this question all the time. Why shouldn't we? I said, because we don't know the true value of the seagrass. We're only monetizing the carbon side. What about the coastal protection?
Oh, the ecosystem services, the
Yes.
biodiversity.
We don't know so what I'm giving you is just a minimum value.
How do you get countries and places to not sell when they need the money now?
And that's what I told you, why we produce the forward. Because when we produce the forward, you sell the investor the future. And once they believe you and buy into the future, they give you the money today. So the communities get the money today. And the job of the community is to live up to its word of protecting the asset on behalf of the investor. The thing that I worry about is the equity side.
How so?
Meaning we need to build into these markets, nature markets, that they be equitable, not hope for the best.
And how do you do that? What does that look like?
Oh, by design. Like in the case of Bahamas, they created a trust fund. The money goes from the sale of the carbon goes into a trust fund. It's under lock and key, and the trust fund ensures that 93% goes to the communities.
Your passion is so clear in what you're doing. If you can leave us with one thing, what do you want to leave the listener with? Is there something that the listener can do in this new project? I mean, not specifically this project, but in this new endeavor.
Yes, of course. Look, there are a lot of people saying there's a gloom and doom because there's a climate change and all this stuff. But my story has a happy ending.
How so?
Remember Alice in Wonderland?
Mm-hmm.
When she got lost, she met the cat and she told the cat, can you show me the way? And the cat says, well, where do you want to go? And then Alice says, what if I don't know? And then the cat gave her the most beautiful answer, was, then what difference does it make? You need to know where you want to go. One thing is clear to all of us, we cannot continue to live the way we are. Because you're seeing it, the destruction of nature in real time, right? People always tell me, why are you so... I said, do you think we are in good times? They say, no. I said, then we got to do something about it. But to do something about it, you got to know what the problem is. The problem is we only recognize one side of nature, the provisioning side of nature, what it provides us. We never understood, and now the science is informing us, that the regulating side of nature, where nature just lives for herself, longing for herself, is incredibly valuable to us too. And then the two models come together, and we as humans start to have a systems approach towards nature rather than a cookie cutter approach. So what I want to leave your reader with is tomorrow is a happy day, but it's not about sitting back and doing nothing. It's about engaging. It's about agency. My story is about giving people agency, that you have to free your mind from the idea that it's a win-lose proposition. It doesn't have to be like that. It's a misreading of Darwin's theory even. what was proselytized about survival of the fittest, if you really read Darwin carefully, you realize those that survived are the ones that collaborated with each other. These are the species that survived.
And the lesson I'm taking away from this too is that you can use whatever skill set you have, which yours was in the financial world, and put a green lens on it and make a really positive impact for the world.
Absolutely.
With the skills that you have. You don't have to be a scientist or,
No,
in the conservation
100%.
field. There's so many ways you can make an impact. And that's what I'm taking away from this today. Thank you.
Look at my team. Look at my team. When I hire people, they say, I'm not a scientist. I don't need a scientist. Oh, I am not an ecologist. I don't need an ecologist. I have people who have degrees in language. I have musicians. I have scientists. I have mathematicians. I have historians. I have anthropologists. I have legal minds. What the idea is, do you believe that we can live better in the house of tomorrow? And the answer is yes, we can. There's a cliche that came from what Einstein used to say: repeating same mistake and expecting a different outcome is sheer lunacy. And the paradigm has arrived.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ralph.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Healthy Seas podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, follow and share it with others who care about the ocean. Want to dive deeper? Subscribe to our newsletter at healthyseas.org/newsletter for behind-the-scenes stories, upcoming projects, and partner updates from around the world. There are many ways to be part of the mission. Donate, partner, spread the word, or simply stay connected. Explore how at healthyseas.org/take-action. Together, we can turn marine waste into waves of change.